قل هذه سبيلي أدعو إلى الله على بصيرة أنا ومن اتبعني وسبحان الله وما أنا من المشركين.
So we will continue inshallah with where we left off, explaining the title of the book of Imam at-Tirmidhi, Jami at-Tirmidhi, which we said that the proper title that the author himself named the book is al-Jami al-Mukhtasar min as-Sunani wa ma'rifat as-Sahih wal-Ma'lul wa ma alayhi al-Amal. And we stopped at the second word in this title, al-Mukhtasar. Now we continue with the third word, which is min as-Sunan. Al-Jami al-Mukhtasar min as-Sunan. And we can also derive from this, just like we derived from the word as-Sunan in Sunan Abi Dawud, that the Sunnah, it refers to the marfu ahadith, the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And this is a reality of the book of Imam at-Tirmidhi, al-Jami'. You will find extremely rare mawqufat. There are no mawqufat except in rare instances. Extremely little number of mawqufat, the athar of the Sahaba and the Tabi'een. And these rare mawqufat that he has, the athar of the Sahaba and the Tabi'een, he has mentioned them to give proof to who from the Sahaba and the Tabi'een acted upon these ahadith. In these rare instances that he has mentioned these mawqufat pertain and relate to the actions of the Sahaba and the Tabi'in in relation to these ahadith, who from them acted upon these ahadith. And from the benefits that can be mentioned is that from the differences between Jami' at-Tirmidhi and the other books of hadith or kutub al-Sitta is that he does not use the word kitab when he has structured and organized his books. The other muhaddithin, they use the word kitab, kitab al-tahara, kitab al-salah, kitab al-zakat, the book of purification, the book of prayer, the book of fasting, etc. He uses the word abwab, abwab al-tahara, abwab al-salah, yani chapters, several chapters of purification. And then he will mention underneath it, bab so and so, bab so and so. So instead of using the word kitab, he uses the word abwab, Now we'll mention some of the similarities and differences between Jami' at-Tirmidhi and the other books that we have covered. So from the similarities between Jami' at-Tirmidhi and Sahih Muslim is the precision that Imam Tirmidhi gives to the different wordings of the hadith. So he narrates the hadith and gathers his different words that are found in the various chains of that hadith in one place. Like as we said, Imam Muslim also does, and he is known for that. So those words that are different, that are added, subtracted, he mentions all of this in the same place with the hadith. And as we said, this is similar to Imam Muslim, where he mentions these words all in one place, and he does not split up the hadith like Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah did in several other chapters and repeats the ahadith. As we said, you will almost not find any repetitive hadith in Jami' at-Tirmidhi, and this is in difference to Imam al-Bukhari. From the aspects in which he resembles Imam al-Bukhari or Sahih al-Bukhari is his importance to the fiqh of giving importance to fiqh al-hadith, giving importance to the fiqh that is derived from this ahadith. As we said repeatedly, from the distinguishing aspects of Sahih al-Bukhari is his chapter headings, tabwibat, that contain the fiqh of this ahadith, the jurisprudence matters of this ahadith. Similar is the case of Imam at-Tirmidhi. Rather, Imam at-Tirmidhi made it a condition upon him to not mention any hadith in his book al-Jami' except that it has been acted upon by one of the fuqaha. And we take that from his title, when he says, وَمَا عَلَيْهِ الْعَمَلِ. He has made it a condition upon himself to mention the ahadith that any of the jurists from the great jurists of Islam have acted upon this hadith. So this is a condition that he has set in for himself. So one now benefits that Imam Abu Dawud in his Sunan, he has made a condition to gather all the foundational ahadith of ahkam and jurisprudence that the fuqaha can use for their rulings and deriving them. Imam at-Tirmidhi has gathered the ahadith, made it a condition to gather and mention those ahadith that any of the fuqaha, any of the jurists have acted upon. So this is a main condition in his book. So you will find that after many of the hadith that he narrates or mentions in this book, he will mention after them, وَالْعَمَلُ عَلَى هَذَا عِنْدَ أَهْلِ الْعِلْمِ. These are statements you will find in vast numbers in this book. After several hadith, he will mention, وَالْعَمَلُ عَلَى هَذَا عِنْدَ أَهْلِ الْعِلْمِ. That the scholars, the jurists have acted upon this hadith in unity. That the scholars of Islam and the jurists have acted upon this hadith in unity. And sometimes he will mention وَالْعَمَلُ عَلَى هَذَا عِنْدَ أَكْثَرِ أَهْلِ الْعِلْمِ. That the majority of the scholars, most of the scholars, jurists have acted upon this hadith. Even though some of them have left this hadith for other reasons or their fiqh, but the majority of the scholars have acted upon this hadith. And sometimes he will say وَالْعَمَلُ عَلَى هَذَا عِنْدَ بَعْدْ أَهْلِ الْعِلْمِ. That some of the scholars of hadith have acted upon this hadith. So this is the condition he has set upon himself, to not mention any hadith in his Jami' except that at least one of the jurists from the great jurists of Islam has acted upon this hadith. And he will tell you if all of them have acted upon this hadith, or if some of them have acted upon this, or if most of them have acted upon this. And he mentions in the beginning of his book Al-Ilal Al-Saghir, the introduction that he wrote to his Al-Jami', that كل ما ورد في هذا الكتاب فهو صحيح معمول به إلا حديثين. That every hadith that I have mentioned in this book, that we said is almost 4,000 in number, that every single hadith, one from the jurists of Islam has acted upon it except two hadith. Except two ahadith. And he did not leave mention of this ahadith for us to research and to tire ourselves. He mentioned these two ahadith. To act upon it, to say to rule upon this, to rule by which this ahadith contain. To rule by which this ahadith contain from the rulings that they contain. So he mentioned that these two ahadith, and he mentioned those two ahadith, that these are the only two ahadith in that book that I could not find any of the jurists from the jurists of Islam saying by what this hadith contains. And I'll mention one of them because in this is a great benefit. One of the hadith is the hadith in which the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said that if a person was to drink alcohol and he was caught, then upon the Muslim ruler in which the rule of Islam is established, upon him is to punish him by lashing him. Then he is set free. If he is caught again a second time, then he is again given the same punishment of lashing. If he is caught a third time, then again he is given the same punishment of lashing. If he is caught a fourth time, faqtulu, kill him. Kill him. And Imam Tirmidhi says, none of the scholars of Islam, the jurists, have said by this hadith or acted about this hadith. None of the scholars of Islam have acted upon this hadith. So we benefit that if someone comes today and takes this hadith and says the Muslims say this is the belief of the Muslims, none of the scholars of Islam, the jurists, have acted upon this hadith. This is our answer. Imam Tirmidhi himself, the author of this book, has himself told us. And today we find people that come and they use this hadith to disparage Islam and the Muslims. So this is one of the hadith who was from the great Huffaz and Muhaddithin of that era and Fuqaha, said that none of the scholars and jurists of Islam have acted upon this hadith. Also, as we said, that along with him mentioning if all of the scholars have acted upon this hadith, or most of them, or some of them, he would also sometimes explicitly state which of the jurists have acted upon this hadith, and which of them have not acted or opposed this hadith. And as we said yesterday, when we talk about fuqaha and fiqh and jurists, they are not just confined to the 4 schools of thought that are spread today or that we know. From the tabi'een, atba' tabi'een, they were great a'immah that had a school of thought that was followed. They were not less in their ilm and in their knowledge and in their virtue than the other 4 imams. Rather, they were their teachers. They were their shuyukh. As we mentioned, Ishaq ibn Rahuya, he had a school of thought that was followed. Others from the scholars of hadith, Abdullah ibn Mubarak, rahimahullah, from the great scholars, muhaddithin of Khurasan, he had a school of thought that was followed. But for various political and other factors, only these 4 schools of thought have remained amongst us. So he mentions, Imam at-Tirmidhi, for example, that this hadith, Imam Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib has said by it, or implemented it, or acted upon it, who is known as Sayyidul Tabi'in, the leader of the Tabi'in. And he says, Abdullah ibn Mubarak, he is the one who said in agreement with which this hadith contains. And Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and Ishaq ibn Rahuya, wa khalafahum al-Shafi'i, wa fulan wa Malik, for example. But Imam Shafi'i and Imam Malik have opposed these jurists in saying by this hadith. They do not say by this hadith because they have other proofs, or they combine the proofs, so they rule by another ruling. So he explicitly even states who from the jurists have said by this hadith and who from them have opposed this specific hadith. And as I said, based on other proofs, because a ruling is not made just by looking at one proof. The various proofs in that specific matter and chapter are to be collected, and then the fuqaha, the faqih, makes a ruling on that matter. So this is a way in which Imam Tirmidhi is similar to Bukhari, his importance to fiqh, and he's different, and he is a distinguishing aspect of his, that he mentions for every hadith who from the fuqaha followed it, who opposed it, and this is something he made a condition upon himself, not to mention any hadith in Jami al-Tirmidhi except that at least one from these great fuqaha have said by it and followed it, except 2 hadith that we just mentioned. Also, as we said, one of the differentiating factors between him and Imam al-Bukhari is he does not repeat the hadith. He does not repeat the hadith like Imam Bukhari rahimahullah does. And also one of the differentiating factors between Imam at-Tirmidhi and Bukhari and Abu Dawud is that he narrates the complete hadith like Imam Muslim does. In this he's similar to Imam Muslim, and he is not similar to Bukhari and Abu Dawud, that he narrates the complete hadith, even if it has several sentences that are not related to the chapter he narrated upon. In difference to Imam Bukhari, who just mentions the part that relates to this chapter and mentions the other part in the chapter that relates to it, like we said for Imam Abu Dawud. But Imam at-Tirmidhi mentions the complete hadith like Imam Muslim does. And from the great benefits and distinguishing features of this book, Imam Jami at-Tirmidhi, that is not found in other books of hadith, is that after every hadith he mentions the shawahid of this hadith. So he says, وَفِي الْبَابِ عَنْ فُلَانَ وَفُلَانَ وَفُلَانَ, meaning we have a terminology in the science of hadith which is called al-mutaba'at wa shawahid. Al-mutaba'a wa shahid. Al-mutaba'at wa shawahid. What does this mean? When we talk about, we mentioned this several times, that we gather the chains of narration of a hadith. And in this way it can be salih al-i'tibar, it can raise a level from da'if to hasan li ghayri, from hasan li dhati to sahih li ghayrihi. When you gather the chains of narrations of a hadith, when you gather the chains of narration of a hadith, and we also mentioned that near the muhaddithin, the sahabi is the most important aspect. So if the hadith, the sahabi differs, then it is a separate hadith. It is a separate hadith. So if one were to gather the chains of narrations of two sahabi for the same text, this is a grave mistake. Rather, the chains of narrations are gathered for that text for the same sahabi. Even though that text is also narrated by another sahabi, but those chains of narrations are gathered separately for that sahabi. This is the way of the muhaddithin. So when you gather the text of this chains of narration, these are called mutaba'at, that which follows the other. In Arabic, that which follows the other. So Imam Bukhari, for example, narrates on his shaykh, and when you gather the chain, you will find that some other scholar of hadith narrated on another shaykh, but both of them narrate on the same shaykh. So this is mutaba. He followed the other in narrating on the same shaykh. This is mutaba'at. The shawahid are what we just mentioned, a hadith of the same text or similar text on different sahaba, of different sahaba. So these are shawahid. That this hadith yashhad li hadith akhar. This hadith gives proof to the other hadith. As we said, a hadith that is narrated by a lot of narrators and many sahaba, it is stronger in status. It gives proof that this hadith was narrated exactly like it reached us. The more the numbers, the higher its rank and status. So Imam Tirmidhi, from the distinguishing aspects of his book, is that after every hadith, so he narrated a hadith on Abu Huraira, for example. Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu, and as we said, he made a shart upon him, a condition that he mentioned in his title, Al-Mukhtasar, summarized, concise book. So how did he summarize? There are other hadith that are related to this chapter that are narrated from other than Abu Huraira. For example, Abdullah ibn Abbas, Abdullah ibn Umar, and Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, three of them. So he will say after the hadith of Abu Huraira, وَفِي الْبَابِ عَنْ Abdullah ibn Abbas, wa Abdullah ibn Umar, wa Abu Sa'id al-Khudri. That in this chapter, also Abu Huraira, Abdullah ibn Abbas, Abu Sa'id al-Khudri have also narrated same or similar ahadith. Just a very concise statement. Instead of mentioning this ahadith, he will just point the student of hadith to this ahadith, saying that in this chapter, there are also ahadith from so and so and so sahaba. Understood? Yes. So this is his way. You'll find this after almost every hadith. He'll mention that in this chapter, so and so from the Sahaba have also narrated a hadith that is same or similar to this meaning. And the scholars of Islam, they have serviced and exerted great efforts in serving this shawahid that Imam Tirmidhi mentions. So they have written books on doing takhrij of these ahadith. Imam Tirmidhi just mentioned that there's a hadith on Abu Huraira on this meaning, with this meaning or in this chapter. So the scholars of Islam have come and they have mentioned these ahadith with their chains of narrations and their texts. They have gathered these ahadith with the chains of narrations and the text. From the books that have been authored in this field is the book of Al-Hafiz al-Iraqi, Al-Imam al-Iraqi that we mentioned yesterday, the teacher of Hafiz ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. He has a book, Al-Lubab, فيما قال عنه الترمذي وفي الباب. Al-Lubab, فيما قال عنه الترمذي وفي الباب, in which he has gathered the chains of narrations and the text of these ahadith that Imam Tirmidhi just points to. That also Abu Huraira, Ibn Umar, Aisha has narrated this hadith. Also after him, his student, Hafiz ibn Hajar al-Asqalani also has a book on this topic, Al-Ujab, في تخريج ما يقول فيه الترمذي وفي الباب. العجاب في تخريج ما يقول فيه الترمذي وفي الباب. From the most distinguishing factors of Jami al-Tirmidhi is his ruling upon the ahadith that we just mentioned. This is something that distinguishes Jami al-Tirmidhi from the other books of hadith. That he has ruled on every single hadith he had mentioned in his book. He has ruled after every hadith with a ruling from himself. This is not found in any other book from the books of hadith. He himself, the author himself, has ruled on this ahadith. And he has specific terminologies to rule upon these ahadith. Some of them are not problematic, they are well known to the other scholars of hadith. They use them, we all use them, the students of hadith. Like sahih, he will say, هذا hadithun sahih. This hadith is sahih. He will say, هذا hadithun hasan. This hadith is hasan. But he has some specific terminologies for himself that none of the other scholars have used. He has specific terminologies for himself that none of the other scholars have used. And the scholars always say that لا مشاحة في اصطلاح. لا مشاحة في اصطلاح. Yani there is no blame to be placed on terminologies. If someone uses a terminology specific to himself, uses a meaning that is different than others, and he expounds upon that meaning, or people from the way he uses it understand his meaning, then there is no blame upon him. And we all can use a word in a specific meaning. But if someone uses that word in another meaning, but he himself explains or mentions what the meaning is, or from his statements we can understand that meaning, then there's no blame upon him. So Imam al-Tirmidhi has specific terminologies that he uses, and the scholars from his book have derived their meaning, so there's no problem in these terminologies. From the terminology is, he will say, هذا حديث غريب. غريب. He will rule upon a hadith with being غريب. You will find this a lot in Jami al-Tirmidhi. He will say that this hadith is غريب. The gharib, in the general meaning, terminology of the scholars of hadith, is a hadith that only has one chain of narration. That only has one chain of narration. This is gharib. And it can be authentic and it can be weak. Based on the conditions that you mentioned, the 5 conditions, if they fit on this hadith, then it is authentic. And if one of the conditions does not apply, then it is weak. Imam Tirmidhi, from his book, when the scholars have studied and researched his book, they found that he uses this terminology gharib to mean da'if. He uses the terminology to mean da'if. And when he says هذا hadithun gharib, he means hadithun da'if, a weak hadith. And how did they find this out? How did they find this out? They collected the chains of narrations of the hadith. They did takhrij at the other books, and they found that this hadith was da'if. All the ulama have agreed that this hadith is weak. So they said, and this is something they are unified upon, that gharib means da'if. So this also referring back to one of the brothers who asked regarding the hadith, and if someone just says, an Abu Huraira said, and the hadith and Jami al-Tirmidhi, Sunan al-Tirmidhi number hadith, and Imam Tirmidhi himself has said this hadith is gharib. So how can one spread it or act upon it, and the author himself is saying that this hadith is gharib, this hadith is da'if? And I have never seen people who spread this kind of hadith, they mention the ruling of Imam Tirmidhi himself on this hadith. And rarely you see this. So this is one thing. Secondly, from his terminologies that is problematic, that the ulama have differed upon, the scholars, is the terminology hasanun sahih. هذا hadithun hasanun sahih. This hadith is hasan sahih. So the problem here is that he has gathered hasan and sahih in the same ruling, and as we said, near the majority of the scholars of hadith, hasan is a level that is below sahih. They are both acceptable without a doubt. Both of them are acceptable hadith. But sahih is the highest level of authenticity, and beneath it is hasan. So he has ruled on several ahadith by saying Hasanun Sahih. So the scholars have differed as to what this means. They have studied his book, researched it to understand what he means by this methodology. So there are two main statements of the scholars, and there are other statements, but these are the two main statements in explaining their methodology. The first is that this means that this hadith has several chains of narration. Some of them are Hasan, some of them are Sahih. This hadith has several chains of narration. Some of them are Hasan because they have Saduq Rawi narrator in them. Some of them are Sahih because they have Thiqa Rawi in them. This is one of the statements, and this is the statement of Hafiz ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah. But the other statement, which is a statement of Imam al-Zahabi rahimahullah, that we find more correct, is the statement of Imam al-Zahabi, or his position, that Hasanun Sahih is the same as Sahih. Hasanun Sahih is the same as Sahih. This is a terminology that Imam Tirmidhi has used for authentic ahadith, Hasanun Sahih. And what is the proof of that? The proof is that Imam al-Tirmidhi rarely uses just Sahih in Jami al-Tirmidhi. You rarely find him ruling on a hadith with just the word Sahih. And it is not possible that only a small number of ahadith are just Sahih. Are just Sahih. So Hasanun Sahih is a terminology that he used that is similar to Sahih. And it is not possible in 4,000 ahadith, or very few are only Sahih. So Hasanun Sahih is also a terminology that he uses to describe Sahih. And this is something that we can mention example for the listeners to understand, is that we have two terminologies, Muslim and Mu'min. Muslim and Mu'min. If one of them is just mentioned Muslim or just Mu'min, then it includes both of them, Islam and Iman. If Muslim is mentioned, then he is Muslim and Mu'min. If Mu'min is mentioned, then he is Muslim and Mu'min. But if they are mentioned together, Muslim, Mu'min, then they have two different meanings. They have two different meanings. Iman is something higher than Islam, something more deeper than Islam. And if someone were to say Muslim Mu'min and it includes both, then there's no problem in this. If someone were to say Muslim Mu'min, then it gives proof to the same thing. So similarly, when Imam Tirmidhi says Hasanun Sahih, then he means Sahih, and this is the position that we find more correct, and as we said, the scholars have differed in this matter. Then we come to the issue of the status of the ahadith in Jami at-Tirmidhi. Are all ahadith authentic? Or are they non-authentic? Are they authentic and non-authentic? So as we just said, that Imam al-Tirmidhi himself has ruled on every single hadith in his book. And he has ruled with that which gives proof that some of them are authentic, some of the hadith, some of them are Hasan, and this is a vast majority of the book. The vast majority of his book are based on Sahih and Hasan ahadith, that which are acceptable ahadith. And there are few ahadith that are da'if, weak, that he has ruled upon by the word gharib, that he has ruled upon by the word gharib. Rather, he himself in his Ilal as-Saghir, the introduction to the book, has specifically stated this by saying, وَمَا كَانَ فِيهِ مِنْ ذِكْرَ الْعِلَلِ فِي الْأَحَادِيثِ وَالرِّجَالِ وَالتَّارِيخِ فَهُوَ مَا اسْتَخْرَجْتُهُ مِنْ كُتُبِ التَّارِيخِ. Yani, in my book of al-Jami', I have mentioned ahadith that have hidden defects, that have ilal, and that have narrators that are disparaged, that have been spoken upon with jar wa ta'dil. So he said, these ahadith, or this ilal, hidden defects and jar wa ta'dil, I have benefited from the books that have been authored in this science. Then he says, وَأَكْثَرُ ذَلِكَ مَا نَاظَرْتُ بِهِ Muhammad Ismail. Most of it I have benefited from my Shaykh and Ustad, my teacher Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari. وَمِنْهُ مَا نَاظَرْتُ بِهِ Abdullah ibn Abdul Rahman wa Abu Zur'a. And some of it I have benefited from my teacher Abdullah ibn Abdul Rahman. Who is Abdullah ibn Abdul Rahman? Huh? Ad-Darimi. Imam Ad-Darimi. Abdullah bin Abdul Rahman Ad-Darimi. And Abu Zur'a al-Razi. Ubaidullah bin Abdul Karim al-Razi. So he explicitly states that there are hadith that have defects, that have been spoken upon in the narrators, that have benefited the rulings upon this ahadith from Imam al-Bukhari and Imam al-Darimi and Abu Zur'a al-Razi and other than them. And rather we have a hadith that he has explicitly stated that they are da'if, in addition to the word gharib. So he says in a hadith that هذا حديث ليس إسناده بذاك القائم. This hadith is isnad, it does not amount to anything. It does not amount to anything. And he has an even more explicit statement after one of the hadith. He says هذا حديث غريب وإسناده ضعيف. This hadith is gharib and his chain of narration is da'if. So he himself has ruled upon the hadith of this book, and as we said, the vast majority is sahih and hasan, and they are da'if ahadith, and he has explicitly stated in his introduction to the book al-Ilal al-Saghir that he will mention da'if ahadith in this book. As far as the level of Jami at-Tirmidhi amongst the 6 books of hadith, as we said, Sahih al-Bukhari is the highest of these books, then Sahih Muslim, and then as we said, comparison to the students of Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri that Imam al-Hazimi mentioned, some scholars place Jami at-Tirmidhi above Sunan Abi Dawud, because even though he has narrated on the 4th tabaka, most of his hadith on the 4th level, but he has ruled upon every single hadith. He has not left it hidden or not remained silent upon them. And some scholars place Sunan Abi Dawud before Jami at-Tirmidhi in level, because Imam Dawud has narrated mostly on the 3rd tabaka, the 3rd level. And in the last point, we'll talk about the books that have been written in service or in service of this book, Jami at-Tirmidhi, or the efforts of the scholars on this book. And as we said before, anyone who wants to read upon the narrator from the narrators of Imam at-Tirmidhi, Jami at-Tirmidhi, he should refer back to which book? Tahdhib al-Kamal of Imam al-Mizzi, Tahdhib al-Kamal, in which he will find the detailed biography of this narrator, who from the other 6 A'immah have narrated his hadith. What did the scholars of Jarh wa Ta'dil, the praise and disparagement, said about this narrator? What is his ruling? From the explanations of Jami at-Tirmidhi, from the Shuruh, the first explanation was written by Imam Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi. Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi, which is called Aridatul Ahwazi. Aridatul Ahwazi fi Sharh Jami at-Tirmidhi. He passed away in the year 543. Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi. And I want to mention that he is not the same Ibn Arabi that is known as a Shaykh al-Akbar near the Sufiya. This is Ibn al-Arabi with Alif Lam. Ibn al-Arabi. And that is Ibn Arabi without Alif Lam, who lived almost 100 years after this great Imam. Ibn Arabi as-Sufi is well known, and the scholars have united on his deviation and misguidance. And from the most important of the explanations of Jami at-Tirmidhi, with which we will finish this, is Tuhfatul Ahwazi. Tuhfatul Ahwazi fi Sharh Jami at-Tirmidhi of the great Muhaddith of India, Al-Allama Abdurrahman al-Mubarak Furi. Abdurrahman al-Mubarak Furi, rahimahullah, who passed away in the year 1353 after the Hijrah, 1353. And he was also from the great students of the reviver of the Sunnah in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, Al-Imam Sayyid Nazir Hussain al-Dahlawi, rahimahullah. And as we said there, we will say here, the special trait of this explanation is that it is not confined to any specific madhab from the madhahib, from the schools of thought. It goes with the hadith and the dalil wherever it leads them. And also, it is on the aqidah of the salaf. It is upon the aqidah of the salaf, in which you will not find the mistakes in aqidah that are found in other explanations. And with this, we have finished Jami at-Tirmidhi. And if there are any questions, we can take them, inshallah.
Well, I asked you yesterday, you know, the Ibn Majah contains the weakest of the hadiths.
No.
Is it true? Ibn Majah.
There's no doubt that Sunan Ibn Majah is the lowest of the 6 books of hadith. And we'll mention when we talk about it. And this is because the zawaid of Sunan Ibn Majah, those are hadith, we talked about zawaid yesterday. Those are hadith that only Sunan Ibn Majah has narrated, that are not found in the other 5 books of hadith. Many of them are weak. Rather, a lot of them are severely weak. And this is the sole reason that Ibn Majah has decreased in rank, because of the vast number of weak ahadith that are found in Sunan Ibn Majah.
Okay. Other thing, Sahih Ibn Huzaymah.
Yeah.
It title it says Sahih Ibn Huzaymah, like Sahih Muslim, Sahih Bukhari.
No, this is the
Ibn Huzaymah. What is Sahih?
No, this is what is well known. Like Sahih Bukhari is well known as Sahih al-Bukhari. Sahih Muslim is well known, and we mentioned it has another title. Sahih Ibn Khuzaymah also has a vast title, a long title, which has his conditions and his methodology embedded in this title. So it is a vast title, and I guess if we ever finish this 6 books of hadith, we might have another seminar on the other books of hadith, inshallah. No.
You mentioned the 2 hadith that
Yeah.
Tirmidhi said that were not acted on.
Yeah.
So what should we do with these hadith? Should we consider them part of the deen? What is our position regarding these? We accept them?
No, I mean, as I said, he has made a condition upon him to mention the hadith that even one of the great jurists from the jurists of Islam acted upon or told or said by what it contains. So, as we just heard and we learned that there are weak ahadith in Jami at-Tirmidhi, who himself has mentioned that they are weak explicitly, even though some from the jurists have acted upon this hadith. Some from the jurists have acted upon this hadith. So these 2 ahadith that no one from the jurists has acted upon, the scholars have studied these ahadith, and based on their chains of narration, they have deemed them to be weak. Based on their chains of narration, they have deemed them to be weak. Now,
can we share the second hadith, the 2 hadiths?
I mean, I mentioned the first hadith because there's a specific benefit in it, especially in these countries and lands. As far as the second hadith, then it is regarding combining the prayers, Zuhr and Asr, or Maghrib and Isha, without travel, without rain, and without any fear. There's a hadith in which the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ says that a Muslim is allowed, or he can combine Zuhr and Asr and Maghrib and Isha without traveling, without rain, and without fear. Basically without any reason. So the Imam al-Tirmidhi says that this hadith, none from the scholars or the jurists of Islam have acted upon or said by its what it contains.
What's the reason he gave to it?
He didn't mention the ruling upon this hadith, but the scholars have studied this hadith and they have found defects in this hadith.
When someone says that hadith is gharib,
Yeah.
it's only when it's considered weak only when Imam Tirmidhi says it.
Yeah, this is his specific terminology. As we said, the other muhaddithin, the well-known terminology is a gharib. It has one chain of narration, and it can be sahih or da'if based on the conditions it fulfills.
Sheikh, what you're saying about the hadith and the terminology, can you maybe shed a little bit of light to help us understand the concept of istishhadun and istishhadun and istidlal. How they use it as a proof, but then they take the shahid just so you can do it.
I mean, there's a matter near the scholars of hadith that some hadith they mention in their usul, in their foundational ahadith, that they use for basing their statements and action upon.
مثلا
Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah and Imam Muslim rahimahullah, they have ahadith that they have mentioned in usul and mutaba'at and shawahid. This is a deep topic of science of hadith. The scholars have spoken about every hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, and they say that this hadith Imam Bukhari has mentioned in his usul. In his usul. And this hadith he has mentioned as mutaba'a or shahid. Meaning that usul, this is a foundational hadith that he has based his fiqhi position or ruling upon it. And the other hadiths that are mutaba'at and shawahid, he has used as something to give strength, as additional proof, secondary proof to that foundational hadith. And this is left for the scholars. If you read the books of the scholars like Fathul Bari, Imam Hafidh ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah, he will talk about this hadith and mention this hadith is in usul, this hadith is in mutaba'at wa shawahid. No.
Just for like us laymen, is it okay if we only maybe distribute Sahih Muslim and Sahih Bukhari and just kind of stay away from these as laymen?
No, as I said, from the conditions that Imam Bukhari and Muslim set upon themselves from their title, Al-Mukhtasar, they have not mentioned every single Sahih hadith they knew and they memorized. You mentioned Imam Bukhari, he says that I have memorized 100,000 authentic hadith, and the number of Sahih Bukhari is 2,000 and very few, not even 2.5% of this number. So they themselves knew their Sahih hadith that are outside their books, that they knew, they memorized, but due to their high standards and conditions, they did not enter these hadith in their books. And this is why the scholars after Bukhari and Muslim, they wrote, it is a specific science in the science of hadith, the books of mustadrakat that we mentioned yesterday. They are books that are called al-mustadrakat, in which a scholar came and he mentioned a hadith upon the condition of Bukhari and Muslim that they did not narrate. It means that condition, the narrators of hadith are the same that Bukhari and Muslim narrated upon. Since Bukhari and Muslim left them, these scholars have mentioned them in their books, such as Mustadrak al-Sahihain of Imam al-Hakim, who passed away in 405 after the Hijrah, Abu Abdullah al-Hakim al-Nizaburi. He has a vast book in which he has tried to gather those ahadith that are upon the condition of Imam Bukhari and Muslim, even though we said that there can be a debate about some of those ahadith. Sahih Ibn Khuzaymah was also authored for this reason, to gather the ahadith that have been not entered into Sahih Bukhari and Muslim. Sahih Ibn Hibban, same thing. Imam al-Daruqutni, the great Imam al-Hafidh, who passed away in 385 after the Hijrah, the Imam of Baghdad, he has a book that is called Al-Ilzamat. Al-Ilzamat, meaning that the hadith that he has gathered in this book, he makes it binding upon Bukhari and Muslim that they should have mentioned this hadith. He makes ilzam of them that they should have mentioned because these hadith are on the same condition, but they did not mention. And then the scholars have continued. Al-Mukhtara, there's a book called Al-Mukhtara of Ad-Diya al-Maqdisi, from the great muhaddithin of Ash-Sham. No, Ad-Diya al-Maqdisi. Al-Mukhtara. This book also specifically has gathered authentic hadith, a vast book that Imam Bukhari and Muslim have not mentioned. So, as we said, the Sahih hadith are just not in Sahih Bukhari and Muslim. And as long as a layman, the least that he does is he refers back to the scholars who are reputed in this field, who are known for their integrity and following the science of hadith as it should be followed according to the principles, not following their desires, not following their intellect, etc. So he can mention the ruling of the scholar of this hadith and he can follow it and spread it. And this is what Allah Ta'ala has ordered the layman to do. فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. That if you do not know, then ask the people of dhikr, ask the people of knowledge. So this is what is binding upon the Muslim. Shaykh Muqbil, rahimahullah, from the great scholars of Yemen of our time, Muqbil bin Hadi al-Wadi'i, rahimahullah, who was from the first graduates of the faculty of hadith of the Islamic University of Medina, the first master's degree that was ever awarded, or from the first, was to Shaykh Muqbil bin Hadi al-Wadi'i rahimahullah, and he did tahqiq of this book of Imam al-Daraqutni, al-Ilzamat wa Tatabbu. He did edition, gathered the manuscripts of this book and edited this book. That's another book. He authored another book. So there are scholars who have done this, and we mentioned Shaykh Diyar Rahman al-Azami rahimahullah, who has gathered, after 20 years of hard work of his life, Sahih authentic Ahadith in one book. Now.
وذكر فإن الذكرى تنفع المؤمنين وما خلقت الجن والإنس إلا ليعبدون